Hello, brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 247 of the Chronological Read Through the Bible. Now, today we're picking up in the book of Ezekiel, and we're in chapter 40 through chapter 43. Now, I want to say the reading for today actually picks up in verse 38 of chapter 40, but I'm just going to start in chapter 40 because I didn't cover it yesterday. This is one of these strange passages in the sense of you're not going to really have this as your daily devotional. This is Ezekiel being sent out to measure the courts of the temple. This is a vision, whether he was transported by the Lord or not to Jerusalem, I couldn't tell you. This really seems like it's more of that he's pulled into a raptured vision. But when he sets out to measure this temple, it's easy to start thinking, well, this is measuring for the temple that will be rebuilt when the people return from their exile in Babylon. But that's not the case, because Zerubbabel's temple never looks like this. It doesn't fit these measurements. Even when Herod comes in and enlarges and makes the remodeling of the temple, it still does not match these measurements. So at what point in time is this temple built? Is this the temple of the end of times? Is this the temple of the millennial reign? These are questions that we don't really fully have an answer to in a way. It would definitely seem like, and I think most people would say, well, this is the millennial temple, which it's speaking of. There is a little problem with that, though. And that is that we will see that there are sacrifices taking place at this temple. Now, are they sacrifices that are just sacrifices of remembrance? That's possible, though we still don't have a lot of information on something like that. Are they merely sacrifices that are happening and taking place to show us what it was like in the days of old? That's what I mean by remembrance. It is just an interesting situation. It's easier to point out the things that are missing, though, in this temple that Ezekiel is measuring. Even though it has the altars there, a lot of the furnishings, there's a very important piece of furniture which is not spoken of, and that is the Ark of the Covenant is not mentioned in this passage. Another thing which is missing is the curtain, which divided the Holy of Holies from the holy place. So if there's no ark, there's no need for the curtain. That's one of the things that I've always stood upon with pointing out to people, that when the curtain is torn in two, to show that we have access to God, that there is no separation between us today as believers and the mercy seat of God. Well, the ark had to be there when that curtain was torn in two. The ark's what gave the importance to the temple. So you would say, well, what gives the importance to this temple? Well, this would come back to where we are seeing this temple as a millennial temple. As I say, it's just the problem with the sacrifices which take place. This is one of these things of where it's difficult to give commentary, because commentators themselves are all over the place about the meaning and significance of what's happening here. Most will all default to this being the millennial temple, but as I say, you are then left with the problem of the sacrifices which are taking place in the temple. And just to clarify why that's a problem, well, the Messiah, his death, the shedding of his blood on the cross, was that final sacrifice once and for all. There's no need for sacrifices or atonement of sin anymore. He is the final atonement. So hence the problem with sacrifices happening, and that's why I say, if it is a millennial temple, the only thing that they could be possibly for is for remembrance in that sense. Another thing which is missing, at least is never addressed, the priests are spoken of, even priests from the line of Levi, Levitical priest, but there is no mention of a high priest. The temple, though, is spoken of as God's throne, his footstool. And in that, he is the high priest, the Messiah, our Redeemer, Jesus. He is the high priest. So I think that does give us that picture, that clarity of what this temple is and its significance. I also want to say it's interesting that when Ezekiel sees the Lord coming, it's very much the same image as when he saw the Lord departing from Jerusalem and from the temple. And remember, when the Lord departed from Jerusalem and the temple, he saw that Spirit going to the Mount of Olives, where the Messiah would be sacrificed. And so now he's seeing that same Spirit. He's seeing God in his glory return to his throne in this new temple. Well, as I say, this is one of these passages which it's difficult to give commentary for, because commentators themselves are all across the board. And I just wanted to point out the things that are not there versus the things that are happening. It's a strange passage. And we don't have a full revelation from the Lord on how this passage impacts our walk with the Lord, other than that we know these events will come about. We know that they've not happened because none of the constructed or remodeled temples ever met these measurements. And there is the aspect that, yes, a temple will be rebuilt. It will be there at the time of the rising of the Antichrist. There will be a temple in Jerusalem. This is where I oftentimes will point out to people that when they will say, well, this person is the Antichrist. Well, there's no temple in Jerusalem yet. Now, here's something that I don't know, and I don't think the scriptures are very clear on this either, is the temple that the Antichrist will be worshipped in, the same temple of the millennial reign. I tend to think not, because that temple would have been defiled by the Antichrist. So I would think that the millennial reign temple will even be a different temple in and of itself too. So just not to throw a little curveball at you there, but I think that we have some interesting pictures here with what Ezekiel is experiencing. I also do want to point out in verse 1 of chapter 40, it tells us that this is the 25th year of the exile. I often wonder when we're looking at Ezekiel, and especially as the chronological read overlaps Ezekiel and Daniel and Jeremiah, you have to wonder, did these three at any point ever interact or cross paths? I often think that definitely Daniel, as a young man in the streets of Jerusalem, probably stood there and heard the prophet Jeremiah preaching, and likely remembered that while he was in exile in Babylon. That's likely what made he and his three friends be more pliable in the hands of God. But did Ezekiel, did he encounter Jeremiah? Did he encounter Daniel? We don't know, but it would be interesting to see that, or to know if that ever happened. Well, it's 25th year, so they still have quite a number of years left in exile. And from the last time that the Lord had spoken to Ezekiel to this point, about 12 years had passed. So there was a little bit of a gap there of Ezekiel at least not having a recorded message or interaction with the Lord. Well, brothers and sisters, I do hope and pray that your day's going well. Until tomorrow, God bless.